So I'm going to continue with the theme that we started last week, but try to make it a little bit more encompassing, go a little bit deeper into the background. And the way I'm going to do that is not just talk about uh, Jeffrey Epstein and the scandal that seems to be fracturing the Trump coalition at the moment, right? And since we last spoke, a subcommittee of Congress voted to subpoena the Epstein files, right? The various files that the federal government has collected in order to be able to investigate the criminality that Epstein engaged in. Um, and as right that happens, I'm sorry, I was trying to get the annotation set up. I'm not seeing how to do that. I know some people prefer that. If you are able to do that, please do that for us. To not just focus on Epstein and the crisis du jour, if you will, although I think it's significant and I think we will talk more about that, but to talk more broadly about media and democracy. And so since we last spoke, another big development, I think, in the politics of this crisis is that Donald Trump has ordered not only the MLK files to be released, but also a variety of information about the investigation into the alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election. And the documents that have been released do seem to support the idea that the Russians did interfere in our election, that they did hack the email system and computer files of the Clinton campaign, that they disclose a lot of the information that they got, and they did so in ways that were designed to be maximally damaging to Hillary Clinton, and so they were clearly uh, uh, trying to undermine Clinton's campaign. And then there's some controversy about whether, right, the inference you draw from that is that they were trying to support Donald Trump, which, you know, in a two-person race, that seems to be hard to undermine one candidate without supporting the other. But were they affirmatively interested in a Trump presidency or just thought it was better than a Clinton presidency? And by the way, they were doing all this to try to weaken the American system of electoral democracy, not just to put their thumbs on the scale of a particular presidential election. And so those files have now been made public, but in so doing, Donald Trump has alleged, and it doesn't appear there's a lot of information in the files to actually support this, that this was part of a conspiracy by the outgoing President Barack Obama to undermine the incoming president by calling into question the legitimacy of the electoral victory of Donald Trump. And to be as clear as possible, what this is an effort to fight one conspiracy theory by deflecting and distracting using another conspiracy theory. That seems to be the moment we are in American politics, where the only thing that can diffuse a conspiracy theory that threatens to damage a politician is another conspiracy theory. And it speaks to, if you will, the dynamics of public opinion formation, of attention within our political system, and also of knowledge formation and information transmission. That it appears that the truth by itself is insufficient to dispel the suspicion that is now gathering around Donald Trump, that far from being the anti-system candidate who will do what is necessary to tear down the conspiracy within not just the federal government, but the power elite of American society, to enrich themselves, but also to be able to prey on ordinary Americans and ordinary people because they are an immoral cabal. That Donald Trump is the anti-system candidate who will, by releasing the Epstein files, unravel the whole conspiracy to make America work only for the corrupt elite and not for ordinary Americans. As opposed to that, Donald Trump is part of the system, right? That's the deep damage, the gestalt shift, if you will, that the Epstein scandal threatens Donald Trump with. And so his effort to say, no, 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 I'm not part of the system, I'm still anti system, is to redirect attention back onto the clear embodiment of the power elite, Barack Obama, and to say, look, I'm going to show you that he was so worried about what I was going to do. He tried to undermine me in advance, and by implication, the Wall Street Journal, CBS News, pick your mainstream media outlet, the fake news are generating this story about Epstein in order to do what Barack Obama did to try to tear me down. I regain my anti-system credentials if this new conspiracy theory becomes focal. In this moment in our media system and in our public sphere, the portion of the coalition that elected and supports Donald Trump and frankly has made him one of the most powerful presidents in modern history. That portion of the coalition that is turning against Trump can only be brought to heel by an alternative conspiracy theory. And this reflects the dynamics of the new public sphere. I'll just say a tiny little bit more about this. And so two things to notice about this. The first is that the Republicans and Donald Trump in particular, right? Donald Trump has won the presidency twice, in part because he is a creature of the new media system. He spends a lot of time on it. He tweets and posts on Truth Social an awful lot. He is someone who has a strong, I think, intuitive grasp on what kind of content is likely to be widely disseminated and effective, particularly at an emotional level in this new media environment. And then add to that, by the way, the Democrats are really struggling in this new media environment. There's an exception, perhaps in Mamdani in New York, right? A new Democrat who appears to be, quote, indigenous to the new media system to really understand how it works and how to generate content. But Harris struggled. Frankly, Obama was, I'm sorry, I meant to say Joe Biden was a relic and a relic who managed to use old media tactics to win in light of the exhaustion with Donald Trump. But there's a clear advantage in American politics today to Donald Trump, to the MAGA movement, and it's in part because of their willingness to engage in disinformation, to use conspiracy theory, and in particular, their ability to treat the social media system as an antenna that gathers information about the most salient, the most viral, the most engaging online content and then amplify it. This is the bright Breitbart media model that in many ways has been taken over by Fox News. These are, right, Fox News, an old media broadcast station that is conveying new media generated content. This system tends to favor Republicans. And I don't think it's just contingent that it favors, let me be a little bit more specific, populist, right wing, exclusionary politics, because frankly, that is the kind of content that is more likely to be readily transmitted and highly engaging within this media system. So there's a affinity between this brand of politics and this media system. And so I do think that that's incredibly important to pay attention to as we look at this, right, unfolding scandal and what its political ramifications might be. And then I want to add one more thing, right? Part of the reason Donald Trump won in 2024 is because young people broke for Trump, and in particular, young men. And not only young white men, young Latino and young black men also broke in the direction of Donald Trump. And then I think we can, from that observation, note that we should be thinking about not only 2024, 2025, but the future of democracy, right? The younger people are more susceptible to this brand of politics because they spend more time on social media, because they spend more time gaming. And when they game, they're also on social media to communicate with the people that they're playing their massive online games with, right? These are not the old school Nintendo games where you play by yourself on your console. These are games that connect you to thousands or tens of thousands of fellow competitors, and you communicate with them on social media at the same time you do them. Very popular, especially for young men, and they are part of what's sometimes called the manosphere, right? The portion of the social media ecosystem that caters to a sense of grievance on the part of young men that the world is becoming less favorable to their success, their security, their ability to secure their interests. And so we should be, I think, really concerned that this is not a one-time development, but in a sense, a first glimpse at the future of what the new media system is going to look like and what it's going to do to the long-term prospects for democracy in countries like the United States. And then let's finally notice, right? Donald Trump is suing multiple media outlets when they report critically about him. The FCC is currently investigating every major broadcast journalism outlet that is not named Fox, and doing so in part in order to, it seems, try to secure their compliance. Columbia University just settled with the Trump administration and gave up a large amount of money and possibly a large amount of internal control of their own academic environment. That also means their freedom, right? And so the Trump administration is not just taking advantage of the new affordances, the new capabilities, the new tendencies and biases of the new media environment. It is also trying to alter the media system to make it more favorable to its brand of politics, and it's trying to do that by withdrawing funding from NPR and PBS, by making it at least implicitly clear to CBS and Paramount, if you want your merger, which is going to make you billions of dollars approved, you better tone down some of that content that's critical of our administration. And right, by trying to make it more difficult for universities and other civil society institutions to operate according to the rules of the old knowledge and information system, and to be forced, in certain respects at least, to give some deference to the new system, which generates information and knowledge not according to, right, the difficult process of gathering and verifying reliable information, attempting to establish the truth or reasonableness of the convictions on which you rely in your research, and being open to the idea that if they do not allow verification, if they do not permit of some kind of plausibility, you may have to change your mind and change your view. So last week, right, we noticed, right, Robert McChesney's good work showing, right, the strong correlation between the expenditure on public media and the quality of the media system in the countries that spend more on public media, and the health of the democracy in the countries that spend more. We noticed, in other words, that the fourth estate, the press, and the media system are integral to the well-functioning democracies of the 20th century, and that one of the things then we should be worried about is the United States defunds public media. Not that public media were ever as well funded here or as formative or influential on our media system as a whole, but this is just another injury to the overall media system, and in particular to the legacy media, to media that continues to be generated in terms of its content by professional journalists, that continues to be edited and fact-checked for verifiability, reliability, public relevance. This media system is weakening, right, and being displaced by an alternative media system, and we should anticipate that the quality of the media system is going to degenerate as a result. This is already relatively advanced, and that democracy is going to suffer as a result. We also looked, right, at the way in which large portions of the United States rely on public funding for their public media. It's not uniformly true. It is, right, much more the rural, less densely populated areas in the United States that rely on public funding. They're the ones who are going to be hardest hit. And when they lose their NPR and PBS stations, not all of them will, but it seems likely that there will be a paring down of the public media system as a result of this funding cut. People will, among other things, transition over to commercial media and social media, media that are less reliable. In particular, the social media, much more likely to be conduits for disinformation, and that the result is going to accelerate a structural change in our public sphere in which social media and the partitioned sub-publics that tend to flourish in social media. And we spoke about this last week, right? Social media rely on algorithms. They rely on complex computational programs that monitor the engagement of the particular user. You turn on CBS at 11:30, you see Colbert. You look at Facebook at any time of the day, and you see what's called, right, news stream or news feed that is tailored to you and people like you based on your previous browsing and viewing history, right? And so it creates not an integrated overall public. It's not broadcasting. It creates a narrow public because it is narrowcasting, and that increasingly the work of getting elected, the work of winning a campaign, the work of responding to public opinion or manufacturing public opinion is not trying to reach a mass, 50% plus one, but trying to stitch together a quilt work of subpublics via social media influence and via responsiveness to the ideas and content that seem to work on social media. So the dynamics of public opinion formation are being fundamentally altered by the new media system. And then we looked right at the idea that colleges and universities are being attacked by this administration, right? In a targeted way, right? The most prominent universities, the most liberal universities, the universities with the strongest protest cultures against Israel are the ones that are especially being targeted, but they're not being targeted in that respect. They're going after all of the public funding for research, and these universities have become highly dependent on that funding. And by the way, the Big Beautiful Bill also changes the student loan program in a way that will make college inaccessible to people who don't already come from an affluent background. And as we know, inequality is growing in our society. It's going to, in other words, make it more difficult for more people to go to college. In addition to all of that, and here I want to put it somewhat differently from the way I expressed it when we discussed this last week. I think it's one thing when what's required to run an effective political campaign is that you be highly responsive to what works on social media. That changes the tone and the content of political communication decisively, right? It makes it much more likely that it's going to be fragmentary, that it's going to be coarse, that it's going to be mean, and that disinformation is going to be as credible as reliable information. But having said that, it's still something different and worse when the social media based disinformation migrates from the campaign into governance, into the policy making process. And in all kinds of ways, the Big Beautiful Bill, particularly in terms of its removing of the subsidies for alternative or sustainable energy sources, its specific hostility to solar and wind and electric vehicles, will damage the long-term economic prospects and competitiveness of the United States. In many ways, it is ceding the future of energy to China and Europe when, for the first time in quite a while, the United States was actually playing ball on these fronts with these countries, right? And the reason I bring this up is because it points out that disinformation prevailed over pragmatism, over sane and ultimately the kind of policy that is conducive to the long-term national security and economic interests of the country, right? And then, right, since we last spoke, it's not only that the EPA says it will eliminate its scientific research arm, it's that the EPA has drafted now a policy position that rescinds the endangerment finding that the EPA came to about a decade ago that says, right, that greenhouse gases are a danger to humanity because climate change is a danger to humanity. Just ask the poor people in Texas, or frankly, the people who live where I live in the next few days, where the temperatures are going to go up into the dangerous terrains again. There are thousands of people dead in Europe this summer from a heat wave, right? This is just the right perverse ideology created in a social media driven information system, overwhelming our capacity to rely on sound expert knowledge in our policymaking process. If you will, this is the next stage in the evolution of democracy in light of the evolution of our technology, particularly our intellectual technology. We're now in a place where it's not just the campaign, it's the policy making process that is being driven by social media generated disinformation. And we'll get into this. I think a fair bit of this disinformation is being generated by the very industries that stand to benefit from deregulation. Not all of it, right? I don't see the pharmaceutical industry's interest in what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing with vaccines. I think that's just more, right, pure online conspiracy theory. Wouldn't it be great if we could, do something about autism simply by altering our vaccine schedule? Alas, it's not possible to do it because the science is bunk. So, having said all of that, right, we're now in a place where, right, competing conspiracy theories are consuming Washington, consuming our national politics, where the president, having deployed one conspiracy theory that has turned against him, is attempting to seed and amplify a second conspiracy theory to deflect from the first. And I want to return to some analysis and to further develop and deepen the analysis that we've looked at together before. And so I start with these two philosophers, and their different but related work. Andy Clark, an Australian who is very influential in a wide range of topics in cognitive science and philosophy of mind. But I think from our perspective, his most relevant idea is what he calls the extended mind thesis. And so the claim is relatively straightforward, if a little bit hard to, get your mind around, which is that the mind is not exclusively in your brain or body, right? You can see behind me a whole bunch of books, right? And in order to be able to speak with you, I read all, or at least portions of, a lot of those books, right? And the result is that I have a much broader access to knowledge than I would have if I had to start from scratch on each idea I'm interested. Thank goodness, right? There's all this very developed thinking and discourse available to me in the relatively inexpensive commodity on the shelf behind me, the book. I can get it from the library. I can open it up, and there I can see some of the great minds of human history working out ideas, but also many of my contemporaries doing unique and important investigative work. And I learn. Right. And so the world in which we have ready access to written books, please note that that world is not very old at all. The paperback is not much more than 100 years old. The mass distributed access to the library not much more than 150 years old. The public library, the public school, broad-based literacy, new developments that don't just change our culture, they change our minds. They change the way we think. And so this directs our attention to intellectual technology. The book is a piece of intellectual technology. Literacy is a kind of intellectual technology, and we think differently as a result of the intellectual technology that is widely diffuse and easily available to us. And by the way, the new technology, social media technology, is also intellectual technology. And I'm just going to digress for a moment into the idea that there is speculative, but I think increasingly credible um, information, theories, I guess I should say, within cognitive science, brain science, that suggests we're beginning to see changes in the structure of the brain that can be traced back to sustained social media and digital technology use, particularly from a young age. It is changing, for instance, the reliance on dopamine for pleasure and happiness. And so one line I came across that I find to be, I think, really illuminating is to talk about social media as a system for commodifying dopamine hits. As you're probably aware, dopamine is a neurotransmitter associated with transient experiences of pleasure. It's what you get when you hit the jackpot at the casino. It's what you get when you have a potato chip or a Dorito or a Cheeto or an M&M candy, right? And one of the features of dopamine transmission is that it downregulates the receptor in the brain, which means basically quickly you want more, right? And that the use of social media creates a dopamine hit, and then you want more, right? So this is technology that is addictive. This is technology that is changing the reward structure of our minds, our brains, I should say. It's changing our attention spans. So, right, we co-evolve with our technology. Much of our intellectual technology throughout human history has been technology that assists us in thinking better, right? It's part of the reason we have become the dominant species on the planet. But the new technology, the social media technology, is not necessarily assisting us in thinking better. It may, in fact, be causing cognitive degeneration, right? The moving backwards as opposed to forwards in terms of human intellectual capacity. And another philosopher who I like a lot, Joseph Heath, Canadian in this case, in his book Enlightenment 2.0, notes that, right, the world of right technology, the world of our extended minds, is increasingly hostile to calm deliberation, and that's not accidental. That these products are engineered to addict and distract us, that there's a kind of technological evolution that makes this the most profitable model, that the idea that attention has become the most precious and maybe endangered commodity in our world today, and that the technology allows for the capture and harvesting of attention. These are, I think, things that don't just concern us humanistically or existentially, they also concern us politically. And so I'm going to turn back now to politics, and in particular, political communication. And here I'm going to draw on two books, both of which, right, were written more or less simultaneously, both of which feature lie in the title, and I don't think it's accidental. Sasha Issenberg, who's written some very good books about the evolution of political campaigns that document the way in which new technology is transforming political campaigning in the United States. His most recent book is called Lie Detectives: A Search in Search of a Playbook for Winning Elections in the Disinformation Age. And then Sasha Issenberg is a journalist, but he teaches political science at UCLA as well. And then Philip Howard, who's one of the leading students of technology and politics, teaches at Oxford University, and his book is called Lie Machines. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of the background here. Issenberg, in particular, looks at the way in which many presidential and other campaigns focus on what is trending in social media in order to determine how to connect with their base, how to assemble an effective coalition, how to shape their messaging and communication, and that what they find is, right, that what is trending on social media, what is getting people engaged and passionate, very often isn't true. And that if they want to win their election, they have to tap into these sources of effective messaging that are growing spontaneously, organically, if you will, in the social media environment. That's probably not the right way to put it, because the social media system is structured by algorithms that are powered by artificial intelligence. But this is not, right, the campaign fashioning its own message and content. It's the campaign searching on social media to discover what is working on the social media platforms, and the increasing right strategy on the part of people who are professional consultants to political campaigns is to say, don't start from your message, start from what's working online and fashion your message to meet it halfway, to meet people where they are, and where they're most engaged is on social media. So the emergent computational methods allow political communication to target and model specific individuals. I'll be fast about this. We've talked a little bit about this before, but I want to be as clear as possible. You put an advertisement on the broadcast television network in your area, it reaches everyone, right? And so you want to be careful. Don't say things that are going to really connect with 20% of the population, but alienate 40% of the population. That's not a winning proposition. But because social media feeds are individuated, right? Because what's on, quote, the wall on your Facebook is content for you and you only, or people who have a similar profile, behavioral model as you. You can now reach the 20% who are going to be really engaged and bypass the 40% who are going to find your messaging to that 20% repulsive, right? And so this is fracturing further what was already a fractured public in the United States and much of the democratic world. This modeling of individuals based on social media behavioral profiles and data allows the campaign or whoever wants to use it to manipulate behavior to acquire answers about individuals without asking them questions, right? This is part of the implicit exchange that allows us to get all of this social media for free, right? Remember, none of these platforms charge any money. The one we're probably most familiar with is Google, one of the most profitable corporations in the world today, and it gives away its central product for free. When have you ever paid to do a Google search? Well, actually, you are paying because you're giving the right search engine your attention, and it is monitoring you and discerning how you behave. And that information is incredibly valuable to advertisers and campaigns. Um, and that's done basically without your consent, without your awareness. You might have checked a box once, but you're certainly not thinking about it as you use the service. And so this opens the door for a new wave of techniques reliant on subterfuge and opacity, right? They can get their information without ever asking you to give it to them, and then use it in ways that bypass your consent or even your awareness. So new advances in behavioral science